Um, Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We're delighted to have this opportunity to share the findings of the report When Working in Crisis Becomes Daily Life, Local Organizations Supporting Refugees in Poland, done by Klon Jawor. This report was commissioned by the Humanitarian Leadership Academy as part of the program Sustainable Humanitarian Innovation for Transformation, SHIFT, funded by the Disaster Emergency Committee, or DEC. And as part of SHIFT, the HLA has partnered with researchers to conduct locally led research, which can provide robust evidence to the humanitarian response in Ukraine, but also more broadly. And for us at the HLA, it was important that the research was not only delivered by local researchers, but also co-designed from the very early stages, ensuring that the research products are useful for the local organizations as well as for international NGOs. So we conducted a series of consultations with researchers and local organizations to understand research gaps and needs. And this report we are presenting today is the result of a fantastic collaboration with the research team of Klon Jawor, an organization that supports the civil society sector in Poland. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by two of the researchers in the team, Beata Haricka and Julia Bednarek. This research focused on local organizations supporting refugees in Poland, and it looked at all forms of local organizations, including NGOs, informal organizations, and volunteer organizations. And we looked at local organizations that supported all refugees, Ukrainians, but also refugees coming from the Polish-Belarusian border. And the aim of the research was to understand how these local organizations operate, their needs, their challenges, and the future of their work. So today's event will be in the form of a conversation discussing the main findings, particularly focusing on some of the challenges around funding, burnout, and future opportunities for growth. And I'm pleased to say that we are also joined by Pavel Mania, the HLA Deputy Director for Impact and Influence, who will also take part in the conversation, providing some insights into the findings. And with us today too, we have Jessica Anderson, HLA MEAL Officer for Eastern Europe, who has been an integral part of the research team. So, before we delve into the conversation with the findings, Pavel, I wanted to invite you to share a few words about the relevance of this work for the HLA in Eastern Europe, but also more broadly for the sector internationally. So over to you.
Thanks, Elisa, and hello, everyone. Yeah, I think this research we mentioned is important for a lot of reasons, and this is why we decided to work with Klon Jawor. But even just by reading the results, I think it's super interesting to see the transitions that civil society organizations or local organizations went through during the last 2 years, and the comparison before what was the situation before and during and after. I think it's incredibly important because we are actually able to report on the changes and see the differences. So I think that, yeah, and in addition, we were able, because of this report, we are able to benchmark and see the differences between organizations that responding to the refugee crisis against organizations, wider civil society organizations in Poland. I think there's some really interesting findings coming from this comparison as well. There are very clear recommendations. I think that's very useful for organizations like the Humanitarian Leadership Academy and other international organizations, but also local organizations in terms of how to prepare for the future. And I think it's the report is it's very honest as well, and it prepares us for the future. That it's maybe perhaps not the most optimistic in terms of reduced funding, a lot of organizations exiting the refugee response in Poland, but the needs are still. Needs transforming, but also changing as well. So yeah, it prepares us better and highlights sort of the importance of exit strategies. And I think this is always, as the HLA, this is how we work with local organizations and civil society organizations across different responses in different regions, making sure that especially when we convene spaces for international organizations, local organizations, we stress the importance of having of having the exit strategy for international organizations, especially when they work in a engage with in a response for the first time. Like, in Poland, a lot of organizations didn't have that experience before, or not at that scale. And selfishly, like this report speaks to a lot of work the HLA is doing as well. So that's incredibly important for us as well. We are in that we are designing like at this moment we are looking to our next strategy period, and just there's a lot of findings from this report confirmed that we're on the right trajectory. We talk about the leadership, the burnout. These are the issues that HLA tries to challenge in our offer as well. And what's also important for me is that within this research, like when I speak to colleagues across different regions and I talk about the response in Poland, I realize there's very little knowledge about the refugee response in Poland and how it contributes, like, how does it look like? Sort of what was the role of the civil society organizations, how the international organizations positioned themselves. We talk about Ukraine, obviously you cannot compare, but it's not like for like, the situation in Ukraine is still very dire, it's very different. But obviously, we have great examples of how Polish local organizations responded to the refugee crisis, and this is very little. There's very little knowledge about it. So this is very little. This is a little known fact across international sectors. I think this research paper, the report, that contributes to the knowledge hub that we want to share externally as well. Hence why we're doing this in English. We translated the report into English because I think it's a great contribution to the wider to the wider knowledge generation that we have across different responses. And as you said before, it's also important because it changes the way we approach research within HLA. And I think this is sort of an example of how perhaps the international organizations should approach research projects, when this is a sort of bottom-up approach. When we obviously spoke to Klon Jawor, this is sort of it was their idea. We co-designed, supported this research initiative, but it wasn't just a typical piece of research the international organization commissions to inform their strategy, their decision making, etc. So I think for a lot of reasons, this is a great example of how partnerships could look like between international organizations and local researchers as well. So I think, yeah, there are lots of good points on why this is important.
Thanks, Pavel, and you touched on many points, and yeah, very informative, and thank you. So Jessica, now over to you for housekeeping and other technical information.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so everyone, we are very happy to receive your questions throughout the webinar. So please, if you have any questions, you can either type them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A function in Zoom to type your questions, and we will address them at the end of the meeting. There will also be a space at the end of the meeting where you can raise your hands, and we will take you off mute if you feel comfortable to ask your question vocally. We would be happy to also answer it later in the meeting. And as always, please keep your questions and comments respectful and on topic. And if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat yet, please go ahead and do so that we can know who's joining us today. And also, if you would like to use captions in the language of your choice, you can do so by following the instructions here. So you will choose more on the bottom of your screen and then click show captions, and you can select the language you would like to have the captions in. So, and now that we have the housekeeping, and if you have any questions about this, please, you can ask in the chat and I will try to assist you. And okay, so to get started, we would like to launch a poll for the audience to get to know you a bit more. So please, if you could let us know first what kind of organization you're representing today, and also if the main focus of your work is in Poland.
Okay, I can't really see the results of the poll, but perhaps we can just move on and look at it later. We just wanted to get a sense of who was in the room. There you go. So thank you everyone for voting. So let's kick off with Julia and Beata. So why is the topic of local organizations supporting refugees in Poland important?
Hello, thank you for having us here. Yes, so this topic of refugees in Poland is actually one of the main social topics that is covered currently and was covered over the last 2 years. And outbreak of the full-scale war in Ukraine in 2022 actually had a massive change, was a massive change to Poland and to the Polish society. Many people were fleeing the country, were fleeing Ukraine, and were fleeing mainly to the neighboring countries like Poland. And according to the data from the border guards, 10 million people have crossed the border in the first year of the war. So a lot of people were staying in Poland. They were either staying here or continuing the journey. So there was a big change for the civil society when so many people have joined the society, and they needed, the people fleeing the war were needed support, and those support was provided by the civil society. So the first 3 months of the war were the needs in this first 3 months were covered mainly by the non-governmental organizations. And they are still very involved in this response, although the needs of the refugees have changed. And maybe I will just give you now the brief overview how the needs have changed and how the number of refugees have changed, because I understand also from the poll that there is people from very different backgrounds, and not everyone is involved in working in Poland. So maybe the situation of the refugee situation in Poland is not very well known. So I will tell you how it was looking in the first year of the war and what's the current situation right now. So in the beginning, the civil society was massively supporting refugees and involved personally also. So there's data that 3/4 of Poles were actually involved in the relief effort, and also 3/4 of NGOs, so organized civil society, was involved. So there was a big, massive movement, and also a big support for helping refugees. There was also a support from the state, of course. So there was a special law that was introduced just after the outbreak of the war that helped those staying in Poland to get the social, to benefit from the social system. But currently it's a very different situation. So in 2024, there is still almost 1 million of refugees who are staying in Poland. Those are registered in Poland, so probably those not registered, it's even more. This massive movement of 3/4 of Poles who are involved is gone. So now the NGOs are kind of maybe not left alone, but they are very important actors who are responsible for a lot of effort in supporting refugees. Those support has changed, of course, the nature. So in the beginning, it was mostly the reception, humanitarian help. And now we are in this integration phase where the needs are different. The scale of needs is still big, but the nature of those needs is different. There's a big number of refugees, and also there's a different involvement and acceptance of refugees among Poles. So it's actually shifting, so it's changing, it's decreasing. So with this changing landscape of what's the attitude of this Polish society towards refugees, with the shift of the needs and of the involvement of NGOs. So we knew that it's not so many organizations involved. We wanted to check what's the situation right now in 2024. So how is the organized civil society, mostly organized, because that was the organizations we're looking at, also including those not registered, but it's not easy to capture them. So we were wondering, how are they doing right now? What are the needs? What is the situation of those organizations? Knowing that this refugee crisis is at a different stage, but knowing also that there's a big need for integration activities that NGOs are providing. So that was the background, and that was actually the reason or the main aim of the research that we want to cover, to check the current state of the civil society, organized civil society towards refugees. So that's, I think, maybe the background for this topic that we are discussing. Yeah. That's a short introduction before we go into our results of the research.
Thanks, Beata. So, nice segue. Can you tell us a little bit about the main findings of your work, including the challenges and the current needs of local organizations supporting refugees?
Sure. Maybe before I will discuss about funding, just a short introduction about methodology that we used. So as Beata said, our main goal was to have a current and reliable data about current situation of NGOs or local organizations in Poland. And the data was collected between January and March 2024. We were combining both quantitative and qualitative methods. First, of course, we also did desk research. Then we did online survey, and we had 158 answers, and they were all included in analysis. And then also we discussed a few topics in focus group interviews with representatives from NGOs. And at the end of the whole process, we had also one expert focus with experts from initiatives and NGOs in Poland about main findings and recommendations. And maybe at the beginning, I will say what NGOs in Poland are doing right now, how they are supporting refugees right now in Poland. As Beata said, like, organizations have moved from the reception phase to the integration phase in the operation, because at the beginning of the crisis, of course, they were mostly providing material support. They were organizing housing, accommodations, also helping with registration of the documents and all that stuff, because they were like the most critical needs of refugees. But now it has shifted, and now we can see on the graph that we will share with you that now, like, the vast majority of NGOs provide community integration and provide information, and about the half of the organization provide like psychological support, conduct activities for children and teenagers. They have different type of language assistance and translations. They also organize Polish lessons, and a lot of them also some job search assistance. And what is maybe very worth mentioned at that topic, that organizations have constantly adapted the type of the support to the needs of the refugees. And of course, those needs were changing very quickly. And as we talked with organizations, and they were like stressing it that they were all the time in touch with refugees, with their beneficiaries. They were asking them questions, what they need, how they can provide more effective support. They were trying to improve and adapt all the time. So we guess it's very special and important to say that the organization were open to listen the refugees and heard about their needs. And then now maybe we will skip to our main findings on the other topics.
Yes. As Julia said, the data are a combination. The research is a combination of qualitative and quantitative data. But here in speaking about the findings, and we'll show you some graphs, we'll focus on numbers, but we invite you to read the report and also to deepen the topics that we will be discussing, because there's also qualitative data. There's some quotes from the interviews. So we will discuss 3 topics today, as introduced also. So, and the first topic is with money. It's about funding. So just to give you an overview, what is how Polish NGO fund their activities. So they combine very different sources. It's always a combination of various sources. And to be honest, Polish NGOs on average are not very wealthy. Here on the screen, you can see actually the key sources of funding for the activities for refugees of NGOs or of organizations that we were researching. But I will discuss it in a minute. Just as an introduction, I will tell you about the change and a shift in budgets that the NGOs supporting refugees experienced after the outbreak of the war. So when in 2022, as also noticed, I saw in the chat, many INGOs entered Poland, and it was the result of this entry was actually the availability of resources, financial resources for Polish NGOs. And also on the graph, you can see that international organizations and also foreign NGOs are key resources, financial resources for the organizations. Almost 3 out of 4 organizations, 72%, report that in 2023, their budget increased compared to the budget before the war, which shows this impact of availability of funds that appeared after the outbreak of the war. So due to this money from mostly international organizations, foreign organizations, and local organizations supporting refugees could cover basic needs. They could rent office, they could employ staff, they could deliver new projects. and they were running many activities in 2022 and first half of 2023. But in 2023, the situation has changed dramatically because the sources of funding have decreased. And it's actually currently a big challenge for organizations. And yeah, on the graph, you can see the key source of funding. So for when you sum the first two entities, which is international organizations and foreign NGOs, we can see that 38% of organizations treat those money from international sources as the key funding source. So when those organizations, those entities leave Poland, it's a big gap for those organizations. Of course, they tried also to use other sources, but this one is a key source for them. And it's important also to notice what is the importance of domestic public funds for funding activities towards refugees. And from the graph, you can read that 13% of organizations say that those money from public institutions in Poland, from public money, Polish public money, yeah, it's covering 13. So it's for 13% of organization is the main source. So it means it's not an alternative for the majority of organizations. So there's still need for finding this alternative when the international organizations, INGOs, leave Poland. So to maybe sum up the challenges, what is the challenge here in funding that organizations are facing? So it's connected with financial instability due to the way that Polish organizations finance their activities. So it's connected with being dependent on sources that are finishing right now. And actually right now, 75%, so a vast majority of organizations say or declare that they have big problem with financial stability and getting money for the activities. And they are not very sure how it will, how they can continue the work, because in the future they expect that it will be even worse. So we have this data that 86% of organizations expect increasing difficulties in raising funds. So it's a huge challenge for almost every organization that is supporting refugees right now in Poland. And as I said, one of the sources of this challenge is the fact that international organizations are leaving Poland, and also another source of this challenge of financial instability is connected with grant system. So grants are in Poland the way that organizations are actually funding the activities. And I saw that there is also some local organizations, not donors, but organizations working for, so providing some services here in this webinar. So you probably know how this system works. In our research, it was called even a vicious circle of grants, where organizations are continually applying for funds, they are delivering results, they're reporting, and they need to find another grant. So it's a very short period of time for them for each of those activities, and they are kind of stuck in the circle. And it cannot build their financial stability when they are stuck in this circle of short-term projects. So how the future of funding an organization supporting refugees looks like in terms of finances. So it's it's actually not a very positive message that I have here for you. So organizations are concerned about the future, as I said. They predict the situation will get worse, but they try to find an alternative. And within the report, we also formulate the recommendations, like knowing the results of the survey and talking to the experts, we formulate recommendations. And most of the recommendations are directed at the support entities and donor entities, since we understand the problems, main problems of organizations are systemic, so they cannot be solved by the organizations themselves. So in the topic of finances, our recommendation cover the need for investment of donors in projects that are long-term and that will enable the strategic support, institutional support for organizations. And then that will take the organizations out of this circle of projects, short-term projects. And there's also a recommendation connected with the necessity of reviewing the grant mechanism so that it's more, so it's also can build the institutional capacity, and it builds the partnership between donors and a local organization, and it takes out the organizations from this grant vicious circle. So most of the recommendations are directed at donors and support entities, but there are also those directed at the organizations supporting refugees themselves, since we understand they also can, to some extent, influence the way they are working. And here we focus in the report on the need for diversity, so diversification of sources. So not to be dependent on one source, like from INGOs or from domestic public funds, but just to combine different sources, and also trying to look for alternatives for the funds that are currently decreasing. And these alternatives may be connected with individual and corporate philanthropy. So there is a need for organizations to strengthen the fundraising competences connected with this philanthropy. So how to bring this knowledge, this know-how to organizations connected with getting fundraising from individuals and from institutions and from business entities as well.
And the other topic that we wanted to show you.
So maybe there's some questions connected with funding or some other remarks.
Thanks, Beata. And yes, I was thinking whilst you were presenting the findings that unfortunately this is not the first time that we hear this. After a crisis strikes, there's a lot of international organizations going into a country, providing funds, support to local organizations and to the affected community. So my question is for Pavel. So this research has shown that local organizations have been supported in Poland by international funding. But with this overall funding shrinking, how can INGOs like Save the Children or the Humanitarian Leadership Academy ensure that they can continue to provide some kind of support to local organizations?
Thanks, Elisa. I think Beata mentioned a lot of it, but to ensure that international non-governmental organizations, INGOs, can continue supporting local organizations despite the shrinking international funding. I think we can think of few strategies. First, we need to encourage local partners to maybe diversify their funding sources. That, as was said before, it's crucial to encourage local organizations to seek funds from a variety of sources, such as domestic public funds, maybe corporate philanthropy, private donations, and maybe in-kind contributions for business and the individuals. Next, we should perhaps develop the fundraising capacity of organizations, providing training and resources to enhance then the fundraising skills. This includes teaching grant writing, crowdfunding techniques, and how to build relationship with potential donors. I know it's also these are all well known, but I think this is maybe this is how we can strengthen perhaps in the capacities. But I think this is not that innovative in terms of like as we said, a lot of those issues are systemic. So I think that speaks to wider challenges in the sector. But apart from that, promoting partnerships with the private sector is another key strategy. We have great examples from Poland about this partner, like how private sector contributed to and supported local organizations, especially in the initial phase of the response, which is not very we don't have that many examples from other responses. And I think it was quite, especially in Poland, Ukraine, it was quite vital support. So those encouraging those collaboration between local organizations and business community can lead to more stable and predictable funding. And like a lot of companies integrate the social responsibility in their long-term strategies. So perhaps you have to identify those organizations and businesses that align with which strategies align with our work as well. We mentioned that supporting long-term projects is very important rather than just focusing on short-term initiatives. This focus allows organizations to plan more effectively and ensures financial stability over time. We must also invest in capacity strengthening, and this is what HLA is doing a lot. This is within our mandate. This means allocating resources to improve the operational and strategic capacities of local organizations, such as leadership training, and we have a lot of examples of how HLA improves leadership or supports leadership capabilities within responses. Focusing on reporting as well, and then supporting and enhancing transparency in reporting. Improving transparency in reporting builds trust with donors and stakeholders, and clear and detailed reporting can attract more consistent and committed support from a diverse range of funders. Strengthening networks and collaborations. Again, this is another mandate. This is what HLA is doing as well. Now maybe I can speak to this about some examples that we have from this response later on. So facilitating networking opportunities and partnerships amongst local organizations, INGOs, and other stakeholders. Help share resources and expertise, might mitigate the impact of reduced funding. And finally, sort of advocating for policy support. This is essential too. So we talk about those issues are systemic, and we hear about them in other responses as well. So working with national and local governments is very important. So they can they can develop the policies and funding mechanisms that can provide more reliable source of funding from public resources. And I think that we see it from the report that this is happening as well, as a lot of international organizations are exiting the response. The role of the national governments and local governments, and it's increasing as well. Again, it seems that there are some policies are missing, but what INGOs can do, building on the expertise from the other work, is to work doing much more about advocacy work and supporting local organizations in those policy changes. So there's more funding available from the national governments.
Thank you. A lot of suggestions and ideas, and it's great to hear all of this. I just wanted to open the floor to our audience, specifically on this question regarding funding and on how international NGOs or UN bodies or organizations can support local organizations going forward with the funding shrinking. So if anyone has any comments or questions, we also would love to hear about your experiences in other contexts. So please feel free to share comments in the chat or to put your hand up and we can unmute you.
I have an additional sort of comment, Lisa, if I may as well, before someone else comes in. Also, I think the role of international organizations is to be transparent from the beginning as well. And when you start supporting local partners, you have to talk about your exit strategy, especially when the humanitarian response usually is a window of 2 to 3 years, and then perhaps different funding is available. And I think maybe perhaps that wasn't very clear from the beginning, especially in Poland, where a lot of organizations were entering this humanitarian space for the very first time. They were not aware, perhaps, of the principles of how the system operates. I think this is the role of the international organizations as well, to be transparent and clear that yes, this funding will decrease, and that's the way things are as well, and how we can mitigate for those changes is important, but we cannot stop this from happening. Unless obviously that we have new, the war intensifies and we have new flow of refugees.
Thanks, Pavel. We have some comments in the chat. Chiman says, I agree with Pavel about INGOs building the capacity of NGOs in terms of fundraising. In my experience, most of the NGOs I worked with were not able to operate or continue some projects only due to their low budgets, which is probably the situation that Polish local organizations are facing right now. Okay, if there aren't other comments or hands up, back to you, Julia and Beata.
Okay, so now I will continue with the other topic that we would like to share and the other fundings that we would like to share with you today. And those are connected with changes in team size and issues related to human resources in local government organizations in Poland. Because in the study, we were also looked at the changes that organizations have experienced over the past 2 years as a result of the escalation of the war in Ukraine. And Beata was telling you about the changes in the budget. And now I would tell you more about changes in the team sizes, because one of the biggest changes that has been, it was the rapid increase in the organization teams. And as you can see, like from the graph, almost half of the surveyed organizations have experienced such changes. And they were giving us examples that literally they had a few or a dozen employees before 2022. And within 1 year, they already had 150 or even 200 employees. And it's like in a very, very short time. They increased a lot, and those kind of fluctuations have major impact on how organization function, how they are managed, or how they can deal with human resources. And in the report, we are looking at different kind of problems that the organization can have with human resources. But the one especially caught our attention because it was the biggest difficulty that local organization declared, and it was the problem with burnout. And now I would like to tell you a little bit more about it. That almost 60% of organizations deal with burnout in their teams. So that's a lot. And what is important, the scale is similar in between the leaders, the employees, and volunteers. So all the groups involved in organizations face it. And moreover, the percentage of burnout problem in refugee support organization is higher than among other NGOs in Poland. So this is very specific and particularly a vulnerable problem to this group of organization. And what are the causes of burnout that we find out during our study? So as we were talking, there are many structural issues and systemic issues associated with that how non-profit sector function in Poland. So basically this unstable financial situation, which of course lead to lack of job security in organization. The other aspect is that, of course, the specific situation that those organizations were dealing with, so functioning in the crisis for such a long time, because it was like huge scale of needs and at the beginning of the crisis. But as Beata said at the beginning, now the NGOs are like the main actors in the refugee support in Poland. So at the beginning, there was also like civil society, a lot of grassroots movements, public institutions, and now NGOs are like the main ones that are organizing the support for refugees. Not the only ones, but the really important ones. But from those first days of the wars and months when the war escalated, the people were like working from morning till midnight. They were like constantly responsible for the new tasks. So as a result, they didn't have any power, energy, time to take care of themselves or to their teams. And the other important topic and the reason of the burnout that the participants in our research were stressing, it was the emotional work and emotional burden and stress connected with like working with people with trauma and people in crisis. And there are like many different various consequences of this burnout in organizations. Like the most extreme examples were when the organization cannot really function because half of the employees, they were like going on the medical leave because they couldn't work anymore. And that was like the most extreme. But of course, there are like another one, for example, high tensions, conflict in a team. Sometimes it is also a complete loss of the sense of the mission, like why we are doing all this, what we are doing here. And this is especially connected with leaders and managers. They were saying that because they have a lot of formal job, they are constantly applying for the new funds, for the new project. They have to deal with billing, with a lot of bureaucracy formalities. At the end, they have little to do with organization beneficiaries, with refugees themselves. They are not working in the field, and because of that, they lost the sense of the mission. They don't feel anymore so necessary here. Fortunately, in the survey, like most of the organizations that have identified the problem with burnout, they are doing different type of anti-burnout activities. They take actions to address this problem. Usually they provide psychological support, like individual or group supervision sessions that are led by like external professionals. Some organizations also offer like individual management coaching or mentoring. Some of them have anti-burnout workshops or different kind of soft skill development. Sometimes they're also offering like trips or team building meetings, which is also important. But still, they need more and more those type of activities. And when we talk about the future of this issue and the future of organization teams, in our survey, we also asked about the immediate future of the organization regarding their personnel. And more than 40% of local organizations anticipate a decrease in the number of people in 2024 compared to 2023. A similar percentage expect that the size of the employees and volunteers will not change significantly. But organizations are not optimistic about the problem of burnout in the future. The majority of them said that they expect it will be worse in the next 2 years. So what can be done about that issue? Here we also were trying to think about recommendations, and some of them are to donors and support entities. First of all, to allow projects to include in the project budget costs related to combating burnout and developing employee skills. So that's important to have it in mind. And what organizations can do by themselves. First of all, provide consistent support, not only one per year or once in a while, but have a systemic approach to that issue, and try to find solutions how to organize that type of support constantly for their workers and or team members.
Thanks, Julia. And Beata, did you want to go to the next topic of networking?
Yes, so I will cover it very briefly, and then I understand there is some discussion and questions from the audience. So I think maybe this networking topic is actually connecting the previous topics and also give some insights for the from the future, from the discussion that we will have and questions that we can answer. So funding, people, staff, burnout. It's somehow all connects or can connect in this topic of networking, because networking is actually the main change that organizations see within working in crisis. So when they look at the changes that they experienced over these 2 years, they say that they expand their networks massively. So 81% of organizations say that they expanded the networks, and more than half say that this change is permanent. So they see that the benefits or results from networking or expanding the partnerships will stay with them. And they treat networking as a way of undertaking joint activities, as a way of getting information, of receiving some know-how, expertise, but also from the interviews, we know that it's a way of dealing with some problems that they have. So they maybe there's some competition between the organizations, but at the same money competition, because the funds are so limited. But at the same time, there's a need for getting together to network and maybe to organize the funds together or organize the know-how together. So even though that the networking has so expanded over the years, there's still need for more of this kind of partnership. And this partnership is with other organizations, mostly local organizations, but with international as well. So when we asked about the partnerships, the main partnerships that they had, the international NGOs, so INGOs are the main partner that they provide. So it leads us again to this INGOs as a very important actor for local organizations. And of course, other local organizations or local community, local government is also among the very important partners. But just I wanted to stress that this INGO partnership is very, very important. So it was a massive change in networking, but there's still need for it. And in our recommendations, we touched the topic of this need for investment, further investment in this infrastructure to strengthen the intra-sector cooperation, to create the spaces where organizations can share the experience, share best practices, and they also complement each other. It was named as a benefit from cooperation, that they can build the synergy between the organizations. And through the networks, local organizations also would like to participate in trainings and workshops, develop skills, get know-how, So this is also what they want to develop. And the recommendation that we direct at local organizations in terms of partnership is to build coalitions within themselves and undertake joint actions, especially those connected with advocacy activities, because there's a big need now in Poland to make this systemic change, which is connected with law, with some formal solutions that are not actually, that currently they are not sufficient. And organizations see the potential of advocacy with the government. Also, they are also skeptical about the results, but they want to be together and advocate for some systemic changes in the law in terms of supporting refugees. So I think that was a brief overview of this topic. There's a lot of information about this topic and also other topics that we cover in the survey. So I invite everyone to read more in the report.
Thanks, Beata. So I just wanted to take a few questions from the audience. We had one question that I missed earlier regarding funding. So are there any findings on scale down strategies for NGOs considering the shrinking of funds from INGOs? So I presume that this question means if you have heard any strategy that local organizations are adopting to deal with the shrinking of funding that is coming this year. I hope that I have interpreted this question right, but again, feel free to put your hand up if you wanted to intervene.
So in the research, we were not asking specifically about strategies or describing in detail the strategies, but we were asking about the future. And this is, I think, connected with the strategy for the future. Yeah? When we ask, how do you see your funding activities in the future, and how want you to cover this gap when you predict that there will be a decrease in funding? An organization were saying about this need for changing the portfolio of the funding activities more towards independent funding. And this philanthropy, individual philanthropy and corporate philanthropy, is perceived as more independent. So it's independent from institutions, from the government, and also from the activity of organizations, international organizations that are in the country. So it's more in their hands how they go on with this strategy. So this is, I think, a kind of idea that organizations have to develop this independent funding, which for many of the organizations is connected with individual and corporate philanthropy.
Yeah, if I may add, some of them were also mentioning some advocacy efforts in like public institutions in Poland, that they will take more responsibilities and also give more funds for those kind of activities for refugees. So also building coalitions and having advocacy efforts in local government or in country government.
And sort of what was interesting for me in the report is that there was a lot of mention on on networking, on those alliances as well. So we're organizations that when the funding is shrinking, they have to come together to see how they complement one another rather than obviously compete, how they can share resources to basically adapt to the decreased funding. And that's the case also for some organizations, INGOs that are staying and that decided to stay and continue their work in Poland as well. That includes the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. We have a regional center based in Warsaw covering the Poland, Ukraine, and Romania. And obviously, there was a huge funding available for us, was a significant funding available for us in the beginning of the response, but we still want to continue our some of our activities. So it's also looking into our data, so our monitoring data, doing evaluations on what's most impactful and what's worth continuing. Because obviously, realizing that we cannot operate at the same scale, perhaps we need to look into what is the most impactful work that we're doing, so we can focus on that. Yeah, sharpening our portfolio, it's one of the strategies that we adopted. Sorry.
Thanks, everyone. And as you were speaking and reading some of the comments in the chat, I think that, yeah, there's quite a few comments around the relationship between refugees and host communities. And perhaps it might be worth explaining a little bit more about the context of Poland, because I think it's very different from other humanitarian contexts. For example, in Poland, refugee camps weren't set up, but it was mostly refugees were mostly hosted in private accommodation, for example. And for I'm just thinking that the Polish example is a very specific one and very different from other contexts that perhaps our audience is more familiar with. So it would be great if you could spend some words around how the assistance was organized, but also the role of the government, in the sense that in the report you do speak about the government and about how they have been involved, but not so much involved as local organizations, and how local organizations have acquired a lot of knowledge and expertise around this crisis, and how they would like to be part of, they would like to shift this knowledge and expertise to government, and how that relationship is at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very important information about the Polish context and how the refugees were invited to the private homes, and how the accommodation, how the support was organized at the beginning. Now it's more systemic, but at the beginning it was that's true that it was organized by private groups, grassroots organizations, and people were mostly hosted at private homes. People were inviting families so inviting people fleeing war to their homes. There were also some schools, public institutions, or even private institutions that were also opening the spaces that they have for hosting people, but it was all temporary. So everyone knew that there is a big need that appeared, and there need to be ad hoc solutions that are organized. So it was very spontaneous, and as I said, people were very much involved privately. And the state at the beginning was of the country. Local government and also the national government were also very supportive, but they were not providing the systemic help from the beginning. So there, as I mentioned, there was this law that was helping people from Ukraine to settle in Poland and to take benefit from the public health system, for example, but for example, housing was organized mostly by individuals and NGOs. And currently, what social organizations, what local organizations are saying, that the integration activities is also organized in a big scale by the NGOs, and there's a need that the government involve more in such activities, in integration activities connected with bringing refugees into the society. So a lot of workshops, a lot of Polish lessons, vocational training, activities for kids are organized by the NGOs. And when the money are shrinking, the NGOs would like would like that such activities would be taken over in bigger scale by the government. So there is a need for transfer of some responsibilities towards the government. So it's not that government is not active. Of course, there's a big help from the government, but there's a need, especially in terms of this financial instability of NGOs, that the government will take over much more responsibilities.
And also, if I can add something about this host community, I would say that a lot of organizations are combining like activities for the Polish society with activities for dedicated to refugees, because a lot of them before February 22, they were dealing with the other groups of beneficiaries, with kids, with people with disabilities, with sexual minorities, and somehow they included in their activities also refugees. But it's not that they only concentrating on the refugees before. They just like now combining activities for both groups. So yeah, for like there are some organizations which are mostly concentrating only on refugees, but a lot of them are combining those different groups of beneficiaries.
Thanks both. And I have a question for Pavel, actually, considering that the humanitarian crisis in Eastern Europe, and particularly in Poland, is so different from other humanitarian crises, as we've heard, in terms of how aid was organized, in terms of the sort of, Poland being in the EU and so on. What do you think are the main lessons learned from this specific humanitarian crisis, and how can we apply them internationally to other contexts?
Thanks, Elisa. As you say, some lessons are just reinforcing the knowledge that we had before, but there are also some differences in some, as you said, like the approaches that perhaps we haven't experienced in other responses. But first off, we learn how crucial it is to build trust with local organizations. So when smaller local groups are left out early on, we miss out on tapping into their knowledge and resources. And that was very clear, and it was a very clear message from local organizations in Poland that this hasn't been utilized from the get-go. To apply this internationally, we need to start like more inclusive and equitable partnerships right from the beginning. We need to recognize and integrate integrate the strengths of local partners and in all aspects of response as well. So as I said, starting from the get-go, this should not be an afterthought. Another big lesson was about flexibility and how we respond. We saw I think this research shows very well how sort of the organizations adapted their response. And even though they have sort of primary focus, they focus shifted throughout the response just so they can respond to the needs of refugees as they are changing. So the situation on the ground can change fast, and we need funding and strategies that can adapt quickly. This means advocating for flexible funding mechanisms that can be adjusted as crises evolve. What we learned is, I think that comes from other responses as well. The effective coordination of communications were also highlighted as a game changer in Poland when the local NGOs and international NGOs, government and businesses work together smoothly. The overall response is much stronger. Especially, I think the role of business enterprises in the beginning of the response. I think we need to do. I think there was more research done on this as well, and I think there's more lessons learned in terms of how we can encourage businesses of different size across the globe to support our response efforts more internationally as well. So globally, we need more robust coordination frameworks that ensure everyone is on the same page, including affected communities themselves. We learned that investing in the capacity of local organizations was a clear priority in Poland. By providing training resources and ongoing support, these groups can manage crisis more effectively on their own. We knew that as well before, but I think it's maybe the pushback we received as international organizations from some local organizations saying, we have this expertise, we've been doing that for much longer. We haven't perhaps worked in a humanitarian response, but please utilize the knowledge that we have. So I think that was important, I think, and a bit of a shock factor for a lot of international organizations, because maybe in different environments we've been perhaps accustomed to other organizations perhaps absorbing and not pushing back, maybe being less resistant to what our international organizations are offering. So yeah, I think the organization in Poland felt very much empowered to handle future challenges more independently. Involving local communities and refugees in decision-making processes was another standout lesson. I think we experienced a lot of organizations, especially as the HLA, we work with a lot of organizations in Poland that are refugee-led, or they employ a huge number of refugees. I know that's obviously not possible across all responses, because the work when it comes to like policies around work, if refugees are allowed to work or not, that looks very different from in a lot of countries. And we know that especially refugees from Ukraine in Europe, they've been permitted, they've been given work permits and allowed to work, whereas other refugees from other countries are not. That's also within the same context. I think that's and for us lessons how those policies can actually integrate the refugees much better, and also they can support supporting the work of local organizations at the same times. Because the insights is invaluable for creating responses that are truly effective and tailored to local needs. Internationally, we must include mechanisms to ensure their voices are heard and their needs are met. And let's not forget about the role of the private sector, as I said. In Poland, the involvement is providing resources like transportation and shelter prove extremely beneficial. So I think there's lots of lessons learned for this as well. I think there's some innovative projects that were piloted, and that's at different scale within the Poland response. So I cannot wait for those evaluations and reports to start circulating, so we can learn more about what worked and what didn't work. Because obviously there will be huge lessons learned for us from this as well. Well, to sum up, so applying those lessons learned internationally means integrating local partners early, promoting flexibility in funding strategies, strengthening coordination amongst all stakeholders, focusing on building local capacities, ensuring community involvement in decision-making, and enhancing the partnerships with private sectors. I think these efforts aim to create more resilient and inclusive humanitarian response framework, and I think we are at the pivotal stage within the sector where we know that the system doesn't work. It seems a little bit stuck. And the crisis is we're talking about poly crisis, right, across the globe, through the climate change, the wars and conflicts that are happening, and they offer impact not only countries, low income countries, but also middle and high income countries. We talk about the threat from Russia on Eastern Europe at the moment as well. So I think this is I think for us it's important how to operate with an environment that on one side it seems to be maybe more flexible and easier because there's more money available, there are policies in place, but at the same time it's also more limiting because there are policies in place that perhaps limit and challenge the way organizations work. And I think that's learning how to be more adaptive to those frameworks that already exist and the capacities that already exist. It's a huge lesson learned for international organizations, including Humanitarian Leadership Academy.
Thanks, Pavel, and that's very insightful and really useful. And yeah, I feel like we should write down a piece on this. But anyway, there's a lot to say. But I know there's a few other questions in the chat, but I just wanted to get to the very final segment of the report, and it's around the future. And Beata and Julia, how do local organizations see their future in the coming months?
Yeah, so now finally we will have something optimistic because sorry, we were mostly speaking about the challenges and that were not really good news, but now we will have something. So despite this changing conditions and uncertainties, like civil society organizations in Poland, they are very steadfast and determined to keep going with their activities for the refugees, because from our survey, we know that the vast majority of surveyed organizations, 74%, declared that they want to keep or even develop their activities for refugees over the next 2 years. So that's also maybe the answer to the question that I saw on the chat from Aneta, if those organizations that were combining different groups of beneficiaries, if they are wanted to change again for the previous groups or stay with refugees. So as we can see, a lot of organizations will keep going with their activities. Of course, there is 22% that they want to decrease their activities for refugees, but the vast majority will want to do it again, all over. So that's a good news, I think.
Yeah, so they want to keep going despite the challenges, but there is also a need for some changes. I also saw a question about the activities towards the host community, and it's actually a very interesting point, because they see that they need to integrate more diverse activities in the future. So not only those directed at the refugees, but also activities directed at the local community. So bringing together Polish society and new inhabitants, newcomers to Poland. So the integration cannot be done only by activities towards refugees, but there also need to be Poles involved in it. It's actually a big challenge because of this shift in the, as I said at the very beginning, there's this shift of the acceptance of refugees. So that's also a challenge to address in the future.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I just wonder if there are more comments or questions from the audience before we wrap up. Okay, doesn't look like it. Was there any final remark, Julia and Beata, from your side?
Yeah, so I invite you again, to dig in this topic, and I see, it was hard to see all the comments and questions from the chat, but I think some of them could be answered with more data that we provide in the report. And there is also a short version of the report that you can find, so you can just read the essence of the recommendations and the data. So I just invite you to do this.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for your contributions. And we have one final question for our audience, actually. Jessica, over to you. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Elisa. We just have one final activity for the audience. So if please you could share in the chat a word or a few words of which themes from this webinar or from the report, if you've seen it a bit more, have resonated with you the most, either personally or regarding the situation with your organization. So we are waiting for your feedback. You can share.
And in the meantime, I just wanted to say that Jessica has helpfully pasted in the chat the links to the report. So we have a Polish report, a Polish version of the report and the English version of the report too, and they're just here in the chat if you want to consult it.
And we are also open to answer your questions via email. So we leave our email, it's on the screen. We are happy to explain our data if you're interested in some specific topic. So we invite you to contact us.
Great, thank you. Yes, and some of the answers in the chat are the need to diversify funding, to further support the further support that NGOs will need in the future, and that Poland will continue to receive refugees as the economy improves. So these lessons are very valuable for integrating refugees. So thank you to everyone who shared.
Okay, so we have come to the end of the webinar. So I just want to say thank you very much to all our panelists and to our audience for taking part in it today and for asking questions and sharing experiences. And yeah, we hope you have found this insightful and helpful. And if you want to get in touch with us or with the Klon Jawor teams, we're available. And thank you very much. And I hope you have a good day.